The moment Colin Finch's trembling hands dropped the medical report on their marble kitchen counter, Reese knew her life was about to shatter into pieces she might never reassemble. She'd been chopping vegetables for dinner, humming along to the jazz playing softly through the house speakers, when she heard his car screech into the driveway. The engine cut abruptly. Car door slammed, front door crashed open. These weren't the sounds of her husband coming home. These were the sounds of a man coming to destroy something. Colin appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face the color of old newspaper. Sweat beaded across his forehead despite the cool evening air. In his right hand, he clutched a manila folder like it contained evidence of murder. "Who is he?" Colin's voice came out raw, stripped of its usual smooth confidence. Reese set down her knife carefully, her mind racing to make sense of the question. "Who is who? Colin, what's wrong? You look sick." "Don't play innocent with me." He threw the folder onto the counter so hard it skidded across the marble and knocked over her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white surface like blood. "I trusted you. 8 years of marriage, and you do this to me." Reese grabbed a kitchen towel, pressing it against the spreading wine, trying to control something in a moment spiraling beyond comprehension. "I genuinely don't understand what you're talking about. Please, just tell me what's happening." Colin's laugh was bitter, unrecognizable. He pulled papers from the folder, his hands shaking so violently the sheets rattled. "I'm sick, Reese. I'm actually sick because of you, because you couldn't keep your legs closed while I was working to give us this life." The words hit her like physical blows. Reese felt her knees weaken, felt the kitchen tilt slightly. "Sick? What do you mean, sick?" "HIV positive." He spat the words at her. "The test came back this morning. The doctor asked me about my sexual history, about whether my partner might have exposed me, and I told him the truth, that my wife is the only person I've been with that I've been faithful. That apparently means nothing to you." Reese's hand flew to her mouth. HIV. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Her mind couldn't process it, couldn't align this nightmare with the ordinary evening she'd been having minutes ago. "Colin, there must be some mistake. I've never been with anyone but you. Not since we met, not ever. You know that." "Do I?" He moved closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath, could see the rage and fear warring in his eyes. "Because someone gave this to me, Reese. Someone infected me with a disease I'm going to have for the rest of my life, and you're the only person I've had sex with." "Then maybe you need to think harder about whether that's actually true," Reese heard herself say, her own voice sounding distant and strange. Colin's face contorted. "How dare you try to turn this around on me? I'm not the one who's been home alone for weeks at a time while you claim to be visiting your sister. I'm not the one who started going to the gym suddenly, buying new clothes, wearing perfume to bed." Each accusation landed like a stone thrown at glass. Reese realized with growing horror that he'd been building a narrative in his mind, twisting her innocent actions into evidence of betrayal. The gym membership she'd gotten after her doctor suggested more exercise, the clothes she'd bought because she'd lost weight, the perfume that was a gift from her mother. "Those things don't mean what you think they mean," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Colin, I have never cheated on you, not once, not ever. I don't even look at other men." "Then explain this." He shoved the medical report toward her face. "Explain how I have HIV if you're so innocent." Reese looked at the paper, at the positive result marked in stark clinical language. Her husband was infected. Someone had given him this virus, but it wasn't her. Which meant the realization crept through her like ice water. If she hadn't infected him, and he claimed she was his only partner, then someone was lying. And she knew with sudden, absolute certainty that it wasn't her. "I'll take a test," she said quietly. "Tomorrow morning. I'll go to a clinic and get tested for everything. And when it comes back negative, you're going to owe me an explanation about who you've really been with." Colin's expression flickered, just for a second. Something that might have been panic flashed across his face before the anger reasserted itself. "Fine, go get tested. Prove to me that you're clean, that I'm wrong, but if you come back positive, if you've done this to both of us, I swear to God, Reese, I'll make sure everyone knows what you are." "And if I'm negative?" she asked, her voice harder now. "What then, Colin?" He didn't answer. He grabbed the whiskey bottle from the counter. When had he brought that in? And walked out of the kitchen. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door slam shut. Reese stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by scattered medical papers and spilled wine, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip the counter for support. The jazz was still playing softly, obscenely cheerful against the ruins of her evening. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and searched for clinics that offered same-day appointments. She'd get tested first thing in the morning. She'd prove her innocence. But as she scrolled through clinic locations, her eye caught on something else. The Find My Phone app she'd installed on both their devices for safety. Her finger hovered over Colin's location history. She'd never checked it before, had never had reason to. Trust had been the foundation of their marriage, or so she'd thought. Reese tapped the icon and watched as a map loaded, showing Colin's movements over the past month. The locations told a story her husband had kept carefully hidden. Hotels in cities that didn't match his business calendar, restaurants she'd never heard him mention, the same address in the downtown district appearing again and again, an apartment building where no client of his lived. She zoomed in on one location from 2 weeks ago, a boutique hotel on the waterfront. The timestamp showed he'd been there for 6 hours in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. He'd told her he was in meetings all day. Reese set the phone down on the counter and looked at the spilled wine, the scattered papers, the abandoned knife on the cutting board. Her hands had stopped shaking. The tears that had been threatening didn't fall. Instead, she felt something cold and clear settling into her chest. The absolute certainty that she was about to discover her husband was the liar he'd accused her of being. The question wasn't whether Colin had been unfaithful. The question was with whom, for how long, and what else he'd been lying about. She picked up the medical report he'd thrown at her, reading it carefully now. The test date was recent, but the doctor's notes mentioned symptoms going back several weeks: fatigue, night sweats, swollen lymph nodes. The infection wasn't new. Reese pulled out her laptop and began taking screenshots of everything. Colin's location history, their credit card statements, phone records. If her test came back negative tomorrow, and she knew with absolute certainty it would, she was going to need evidence of what her husband had really been doing while she'd been home alone, faithful and trusting. Outside, darkness had fully fallen. The house that had felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. Somewhere upstairs, her husband was drinking and building his case against her, constructing elaborate lies to cover his own betrayal, but Reese had stopped being his victim the moment she decided to look at the location history. Tomorrow, she'd get her test results, and then she'd start asking questions Colin wouldn't be able to answer. The jazz had shifted to something minor, key, and melancholy. Reese didn't turn it off. She sat at the kitchen table and began making a list of every business trip Colin had taken in the past year, every late night at the office, every weekend conference he'd attended alone. The picture that emerged made her stomach turn. Her husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been living an entirely separate life, one she'd been too trusting to see. When she finally went upstairs hours later, Colin was passed out on the bed, still in his suit, the whiskey bottle empty beside him. Reese gathered her pillow and a blanket and went to sleep in the guest room, the door locked, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness and waited for morning, when she would get the test that would prove her innocence and reveal her husband's betrayal. The marriage she'd believed in was already dead. Tomorrow, she'd get the death certificate. Chapter 2. The truth in black and white. Dr. Hammond's office had never felt so cold, even though Reese could see heat shimmering through the window blinds, distorting the morning traffic outside. "You can roll down your sleeve now." The nurse's voice was professionally kind, the tone she probably used with everyone who came in for testing they hoped would prove their lives weren't destroyed. Reese pressed the cotton ball against the needle puncture, watching her blood fill vials that would tell her a truth she already knew. She was negative. She had to be. But living in certainty and holding medical proof were two different countries, and she needed that passport stamped before she could confront Colin with what she'd learned. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and fear poorly masked by lavender air freshener. In the waiting room, she'd sat among people whose faces held the same tight anxiety she felt, lives suspended between before and after, waiting for test results that would define which world they'd inhabit next. "Results take 2 days, the nurse said, applying a bandage to Reese's arm. "We'll call you as soon as they're processed. Try not to worry." Try not to worry. As if worry was a faucet you could turn off rather than a flood drowning everything in its path. Reese left the clinic and drove aimlessly, unable to face going home where Colin was probably still passed out, marinating in whiskey and self-righteous anger. Instead, she pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and opened her laptop, continuing the investigation she'd started the night before. The credit card statements painted a detailed mural of infidelity. Charges at restaurants Colin had never mentioned, florist deliveries to addresses that weren't their home, jewelry purchases she'd never received. She cross-referenced dates with his calendar. Every romantic dinner corresponded with a night he'd claimed to be entertaining clients. One name kept appearing in transaction descriptions. A boutique hotel downtown called the Meridian. Colin had stayed there multiple times, despite living 20 minutes away. The charges showed room service for 2, champagne, late checkouts. Reese's hands trembled as she clicked through their phone records. One number appeared with suspicious frequency. Dozens of calls and texts, often late at night, always when Colin claimed to be working. She copied the number into a search engine and held her breath. The results showed a professional profile. Lucille Brennan, corporate relations specialist. Her photo showed a woman in her late 20s with carefully highlighted hair and a practiced smile that probably worked well in client meetings or in seducing married men. Reese stared at that professional headshot and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not heartbreak exactly, but its uglier cousin, humiliation. While she'd been planning dinner parties and visiting her elderly mother and believing in her marriage, Colin had been building an entire second life with someone young and polished and probably exciting in ways Reese had stopped being after 8 years of comfortable domesticity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colin. "Where are you? We need to talk." She didn't respond. Instead, she spent the next 2 days in a motel room, reviewing evidence and building a timeline. When Dr. Hammond's office finally called, she was sitting cross-legged on the cheap comforter, surrounded by printed bank statements and phone records. "Mrs. Finch, your results are ready." Dr. Hammond's voice was warm through the phone. "Can you come in this afternoon?" "Just tell me now," Reese said. "I need to know." A pause. Then, everything came back negative. "No HIV, no other sexually transmitted infections. You're completely clear." Reese closed her eyes and let the relief wash through her, even though she'd known, knowing and having proof were different, and now she had both. "Mrs. Finch, I want you to know something." Dr. Hammond's voice shifted, became more personal. "Based on your husband's timeline, when he started showing symptoms and when he tested positive, if you were the source of his infection, you would almost certainly be testing positive as well by now. The virus doesn't work that way. Someone infected him, but the evidence strongly suggests it wasn't you." "Thank you," Reese managed. "Thank you for saying that." She hung up and sat very still in the motel room, holding the phone that contained proof of her innocence and her husband's lies. The afternoon light slanted through the thin curtains, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny planets in their own doomed orbits. Reese packed up her evidence carefully, then drove home. It was time for Colin to face what he'd done. She found him in the living room, looking haggard and desperate. He stood up when she entered, his face a mixture of hope and defiance. "Where have you been?" "I've been calling." "Getting tested, like you demanded." Reese set her purse down carefully. "And investigating, because unlike you, I actually wanted to know the truth." "So," Colin's voice cracked. "The results?" Instead of answering, Reese pulled out her laptop and opened it on the coffee table. She turned the screen toward him, showing the first damning piece of evidence. His location, history, highlighting the apartment building downtown he'd visited repeatedly. "Whose place is that, Colin?" His face went white. "Reese, I can explain." "Can you explain this?" She clicked to another window, showing the hotel charges. "Or this, restaurant receipts. Or maybe this." The jewelry purchase from a month ago, a bracelet she'd never seen. Colin's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Her name is Lucille Brennan," Reese said, her voice steady and cold. "Corporate relations specialist, which is apparently code for sleeping with married executives. You've been with her for how long, Colin? Months? A year?" It didn't mean... "And yesterday you stood in our kitchen and accused me of giving you HIV. You called me unfaithful. You threatened to ruin my reputation." Reese pulled the printed test results from her bag and dropped them on the coffee table. "But here's the thing about lies, Colin. Eventually the truth catches up." He picked up the paper with shaking hands, staring at the negative results. She watched his face cycle through emotions. Relief that she wasn't infected, then the dawning horror of what this meant. "I'm negative," Reese said, "completely clear. No HIV, nothing. Which means I didn't give you anything. Which means someone else did." "Reese, please, let me explain." "Who is she really?" Reese interrupted. "Not her job title. Who is Lucille to you?" Colin's face crumpled. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "We met at a conference. It was just supposed to be once, just something that happened, but then it kept happening. I didn't mean for it to go on so long." "How long?" 11 months. The number landed like a brick through glass. Almost a year of lies, of Colin coming home and kissing her hello, while another woman's perfume probably still clung to his skin. "Did you tell her about me?" Reese asked. Colin's silence was answer enough. "You told her we were separated, didn't you? That the marriage was over. You made her think she was your girlfriend, not your mistress." "She was confused when I ended things," Colin admitted, his voice barely audible. "She didn't understand why I was cutting contact." "When did you end it?" "A few months ago. She told me she'd tested positive for something. I panicked and blocked her number." Reese felt dizzy. "She told you she had HIV, and instead of getting tested immediately, instead of telling me so I could protect myself, you just hid it? You waited until you got sick enough that you couldn't ignore it anymore?" "I thought maybe the test would be negative. I thought maybe she was lying, trying to scare me into staying with her." "So you risked my health on a maybe?" Reese's voice shook now, rage breaking through the ice. "You exposed me to a virus because you were too much of a coward to face what you'd done. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" She laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "You accused me of destroying our marriage when you're the one who's been lying for almost a year. You tried to make me believe I infected you, that I'd been unfaithful, when all along you were the one—" She stopped, overcome by the enormity of his betrayal. This wasn't just infidelity, this was something darker, a willingness to let her believe she was guilty of something terrible, rather than admit his own failures. Colin was crying now, messy and desperate. "Please, Reese, I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but I love you. I want to fix this. I'll do anything." "You love me?" She stared at him. You don't even know what that word means. Love doesn't accuse an innocent person of giving you a disease. Love doesn't hide health risks from your partner. Love doesn't build an entire secret life while pretending everything is fine. I was scared, Colin said. When I got the diagnosis, I panicked. I couldn't face that I'd done this to myself, so I tried to make it your fault. I know that's inexcusable. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, don't leave me. Not now. When I'm sick and I need you. You should have thought about that before you slept with someone else. Reese picked up her test results and her laptop. I'm going to stay with my sister. I want you out of the house by the end of the week. Reese, please. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Colin looked small and broken on the couch, nothing like the confident man she'd married. I hope you get the treatment you need, she said. I hope you take care of yourself and find a way to live with what you've done. But I can't be part of that process. I can't stay married to someone who would rather destroy me than face his own mistakes. She left him there, crying in the ruins of the life he'd demolished. The sun was setting as she drove away, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were almost beautiful enough to distract from the wreckage of her marriage. Almost, but not quite. Chapter 3. The mistress confesses the coffee shop on Market Street smelled like burnt espresso and broken promises when Reese walked in to meet the woman who had unknowingly destroyed her marriage. She spotted Lucille immediately, the woman from the professional headshot, but softer somehow, more real. She sat in the back corner, hands wrapped around a paper cup, shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. When she saw Reese approaching, her face showed genuine anguish. Thank you for meeting me, Lucille said quietly. I wasn't sure you would. Reese sat down across from her, studying the woman her husband had chosen. Pretty, definitely. Young. But there was something vulnerable in her expression that didn't match the homewrecker narrative Reese had been writing in her head. Your text said we needed to talk, Reese said. So talk. Lucille took a shaky breath. I need you to know I didn't know. About you, about the marriage being real. He told me you were separated, that divorce papers were being filed. I believed him. For 11 months? Reese's voice was sharper than she'd intended. I met him at a corporate retreat. Lucille's hands trembled around her cup. He was charming, successful, attentive. He pursued me hard, said all the right things. When I asked about his wife, he said the marriage had been over emotionally for years, that you were living separate lives in the same house until the lawyers finished the paperwork. Reese felt something twist in her gut. Of course, Colin had lied. That's what he did, constructed elaborate narratives that suited his needs while real people suffered the consequences. He showed me apartment listings, Lucille continued. Said he was moving out soon, that we could start fresh together once everything was finalized. I believed I was dating someone going through a divorce, not helping someone cheat. When did you find out the truth? Lucille's eyes filled with tears. When I got my diagnosis, I needed to tell him immediately, give him time to get tested. I called him panicking and he just vanished. Blocked my number, stopped answering emails. I went to his office and they said he'd requested I be transferred to a different department. That's when I started digging, called the house number listed in company records, and you answered. The memory of that brief phone call came rushing back. A woman's voice asking for Colin, Reese saying he was traveling, the sudden disconnection. She'd thought it was a wrong number. I'm so sorry, Lucille said, tears spilling over now. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to hear it. I would never knowingly sleep with a married man. My father cheated on my mother, destroyed our family. I swore I'd never be the other woman. Reese watched this young woman cry and felt her anger shift direction. Lucille was a victim too, just a different kind. Colin had manipulated them both, told them both lies, risked both their health through his selfishness. Tell me everything, Reese said, from the beginning. So Lucille did. She talked about the conference where they'd met, How Colin had monopolized her attention during networking events, how he'd invited her to dinner and confessed he was unhappily married. She described months of hotel meetings, stolen afternoons, promises of a future together. She showed Reese text messages where Colin called her sweetheart and my love, where he made plans for trips they'd take once he was free. He was so convincing, Lucille said. He knew exactly what to say to make me feel special, chosen. I thought I'd found something real. When did you get sick? I noticed symptoms a few months ago, fever, fatigue, swollen glands. I thought it was just stress from work. Then my ex-boyfriend called, someone I'd dated before Colin, and told me he'd tested positive, he'd been unfaithful during our relationship, contracted HIV and never told me. I got tested immediately. Lucille pulled out her own medical records, sliding them across the table. Positive result, dated several months before Colin's test. I told Colin within an hour of getting my results, she said. I was terrified, devastated, but I knew he needed to know. That's when he disappeared. No concern for my health, no question about whether I was okay. He just erased me. Reese looked at the dates, doing the math. Colin had known for months that he might be infected. He'd kept sleeping with Reese during that time, never saying anything, never giving her a choice about the risks. Did you ever come to our house? Reese asked. Lucille shook her head. Never. He said it would be too painful, seeing the place where his marriage had died. Now I realize he just didn't want me to see that his marriage was very much alive. They sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by one man's comprehensive betrayal. The coffee shop buzzed with normal conversations, people laughing, working on laptops, living lives uncomplicated by lies and diseases, and marriages built on sand. What will you do now? Lucille asked quietly. Leave him, Reese said. I already moved out. The marriage is over. I'm genuinely sorry this happened to you, to both of us. Lucille wiped her eyes. For what it's worth, Colin talked about you sometimes. He said you were brilliant, beautiful, that he didn't deserve you. I thought he was just being modest. Now I understand he was telling the truth. He didn't deserve you. Reese felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. How are you doing? With the diagnosis? Scared, Lucille admitted, but I started treatment immediately. The doctor says with proper medication, I can live a normal life. It's manageable now. Not like it used to be, I'm learning. Good. I hope you find support, people who can help you through this. Lucille smiled weakly. My family has been amazing, and I joined a support group, which helps. I'm figuring it out. They exchanged a few more words, careful and sad, then parted ways. Reese watched Lucille walk to her car, shoulders still hunched under the weight of everything that had happened. Back in her own car, Reese sat with her hands on the steering wheel, processing what she'd learned. Colin hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been systematically manipulative, telling elaborate lies to everyone around him. He'd created an alternate reality where he was the victim of a failing marriage rather than the architect of its destruction. Her phone buzzed, a text from Colin. Please come home. We need to talk about our future. Our future. As if they still had one. As if she could ever trust him again. After learning the depth of his deception, Reese deleted the text without responding. She started the car and drove toward her sister's house, where she'd been staying since leaving Colin. The city passed by in a blur of lights and traffic, everything moving forward while her life felt suspended in amber. But even in the amber, she could feel something beginning to crystallize, not forgiveness, but clarity. She knew exactly what she needed to do next. She needed to build a life that had nothing to do with Colin Finch, a life where she could be proud of who she saw in the mirror each morning. The question wasn't whether she'd survive this. The question was who she'd become on the other side of the wreckage. And for the first time since Colin had thrown those medical papers at her, Reese thought she might want to find out. Chapter 4. The Billionaire Crumbles. Colin's face transformed from righteous fury to ash-white terror in the 3 seconds it took Reese to slide her negative test results across the dining table where he'd placed divorce papers. "What is this?" His voice came out strangled, nothing like the confident baritone that had charmed investors and closed deals. "Read it." Reese kept her voice level, watching him like a scientist observing a specimen under glass. She'd spent the week gathering evidence, consulting with lawyers, preparing for this confrontation. Now she sat in what used to be their dining room, surrounded by the expensive furniture they'd chosen together, watching her husband realize his carefully constructed lies were collapsing. Colin's hands shook as he scanned the medical report. She could see his mind racing, searching for new explanations, fresh manipulations to deploy. He'd always been quick on his feet in negotiations. It's what made him successful in his world of corporate dealings and financial strategizing. "This is good news," he finally said, his voice brightening with desperate hope. "You're healthy. We're both going to be okay. We can work through this together." "Did you actually read it?" Reese interrupted. "The part where the doctor notes that based on infection timelines, I couldn't possibly be your source. The part that makes it medically clear you got HIV from someone else?" She watched that sink in, watched him search for a new angle. It came faster than she'd expected. "Lucille seduced me," he said. "She pursued me relentlessly at that conference. I tried to resist, but she was aggressive, wouldn't take no for an answer. It was basically once, maybe twice. I made a mistake, but it wasn't an affair." Reese had expected this, the minimization, the blame-shifting she'd prepared for it. She pulled out her laptop and opened the first folder of evidence. "These are your credit card statements," she said, rotating the screen toward him. "Hotel charges spanning 11 months, jewelry purchases, romantic restaurant dinners. Should I keep going?" Colin's jaw tightened. "You went through my private financial records?" "There are joint accounts, actually. But yes, I investigated, because when someone accuses me of infidelity and disease transmission, I tend to want proof of my innocence." She clicked to another window. "These are your phone records. Hundreds of calls and texts to Lucille's number, late-night conversations that lasted hours. Doesn't really match your once or twice story." "You had no right." "I had every right." Reese's voice cut through his protest. "You exposed me to a potentially fatal virus without my knowledge or consent. You accused me of crimes I didn't commit. You lied for almost a year. I had every right to find out the truth." Colin stood abruptly, pacing to the window. She could see him recalibrating, searching for whatever strategy might salvage this situation. When he turned back, his expression had shifted to something she recognized. The same sincere vulnerability he used when negotiating difficult contracts. "You're right," he said. "I lied. I'm a coward who couldn't face what I'd done, so I tried to make it your fault. That's inexcusable. But Reese, I'm sick. I have a disease I'll carry for the rest of my life. This isn't the time to abandon me. I need you now more than ever. You needed me to be honest with months ago, when you first knew you might be infected. You needed me to be faithful during our entire marriage. You don't get to claim you need me now that there are consequences." "I'll do anything." Colin moved toward her, desperation making him clumsy. "Therapy, marriage counseling, whatever you want. I'll fire Lucille, make sure she never contacts us again. I'll be completely transparent from now on. Please, just give me another chance." "Fire her?" Reese stared at him. "She's a victim, Colin. You lied to her too, told her we were separated. She thought she was dating someone going through a divorce, not destroying a marriage. She should have verified that before sleeping with a married man. She did verify it. She believed what you told her because you're a convincing liar." Reese gathered her papers, putting them back in order. "You don't get to villainize her now that your lies have caught up with you." Colin's face twisted with something ugly. "You've talked to her. You went behind my back to meet with my... Your what? Your mistress? Your girlfriend? What exactly was Lucille to you, Colin?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "I talked to her," Reese confirmed. "She told me everything. The promises you made, the future you described, the elaborate story about our failing marriage. She showed me text messages where you called her your love, where you talked about living together once you were free. That was just, I had to tell her something. You had to tell her the truth." Reese stood, facing him across the table. "You could have broken things off with me honestly if you were that unhappy. You could have said you wanted a divorce. Instead, you built an entire second life based on lies, risked both our health, and then tried to blame me when the consequences arrived." Colin's control finally snapped. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Running the company, dealing with investors, managing hundreds of employees. I needed someone who made me feel alive again, who wasn't always nagging about spending more time at home." "Nagging?" Reese's laugh was sharp. "I asked you to come to dinner occasionally, to remember our anniversary, to actually be present in the marriage you claim to value. That's not nagging, Colin. That's asking for basic respect. I gave you everything." His voice rose, taking on an edge of hysteria. "This house, cars, clothes, whatever you wanted, I worked myself to exhaustion to provide this lifestyle. I never asked for this lifestyle. I asked for a partner. Well, maybe you weren't partner enough." The words exploded out of him. "Maybe if you'd been more interested in my work, more supportive of my goals, more—" He stopped, but the damage was done. The truth he'd been hiding beneath apologies and promises had finally surfaced. He blamed her for his choices, resented her for his own failures. "There it is," Reese said quietly, "the real Colin Finch. Not the apologetic husband seeking forgiveness, but the man who genuinely believes his infidelity was somehow my fault. I didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant every word." She picked up the divorce papers he'd prepared, the ones that listed her infidelity as grounds. "These papers are interesting. You had them drawn up fast. Already had your lawyer on standby?" Colin's silence was confirmation. "You were going to divorce me and take everything, weren't you? Claim I was unfaithful, destroy my reputation, make sure I walked away with nothing." Reese's voice stayed calm, even as fury built in her chest. "That was your plan when you thought you could prove I infected you. My lawyers advised me to protect my assets. Your lawyers advised you to preemptively strike before I discovered your affair and took half of everything in a real divorce." She tore the papers in half, then quarters. "Here's the thing about being a billionaire's wife, Colin. I know exactly how much you're worth. I know about the overseas accounts, the investment properties, the assets hidden in shell corporations. I know because I helped you set them up, remember? Back when I trusted you." Colin's face drained of color. "You wouldn't what? Fight for what I'm legally entitled to. Expose your financial manipulations, ruin your reputation the way you plan to ruin mine." Reese smiled without warmth. "Don't worry, I'm not like you. I'm not interested in destruction. I just want out of this marriage with my dignity intact." "Reese, please. Think about what you're doing. If you leave now, people will think you abandoned me during a health crisis. Your reputation will suffer. Let them think whatever they want. I know the truth. That's enough." She walked toward the door, where her packed suitcases waited. Colin followed, his desperation now complete. "I'll lose everything without you," he said. "The business relationships, the social connections, the stability. People are already whispering about my diagnosis. If you leave too, I'll be finished." "Then you should have thought about that before you risked everything on an affair. I'm begging you." Colin's voice broke. "I'm literally begging, don't do this. Don't leave me when I need you most." Reese looked at the man she'd married, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Underneath the wealth and confidence had always been this, a child who wanted to avoid consequences, who genuinely believed he deserved to have everything he wanted without paying any price. "Goodbye, Colin," she said. "I hope you find a way to live with yourself." She left him standing in the doorway of their home, calling her name. She didn't look back. The marriage had died the moment he'd accused her of infidelity, but she'd needed this confrontation to bury it properly. As she drove away, Reese felt something unexpected. Not heartbreak, but relief. She'd spent 8 years trying to be enough for a man who was never going to be satisfied. Now she was free to discover who she'd be when she stopped contorting herself to fit his expectations. The future was uncertain, frightening, and entirely hers. For the first time in a long time, that possibility felt like hope. Chapter 5. Building from ashes. The modest apartment in the Riverside district had none of the luxury Reese had grown accustomed to, but it had something their mansion never possessed: silence that felt like peace instead of loneliness. She'd rented the place furnished, a practical one-bedroom with worn hardwood floors and windows that overlooked a community garden where neighbors grew vegetables and flowers in shared plots. The building smelled like someone was always cooking something delicious. Children's laughter drifted up from the courtyard. It was alive in ways her old house had never been. Reese unpacked slowly, arranging her books on the cheap shelves, hanging her clothes in the narrow closet. She'd taken only what was personally hers: her grandmother's quilt, her collection of vintage records, her laptop, and some photographs from before the marriage. Everything else remained in that mausoleum of expensive emptiness she'd shared with Colin. Her phone buzzed constantly with his messages: apologies, accusations, threats, pleas. She stopped reading them after the first week, then blocked his number entirely. Her lawyer handled all communication now. The divorce would take time. Colin's attorneys were fighting everything, trying to establish grounds that would protect his assets. But Reese had proof of his infidelity, and more importantly, she didn't want his money. She wanted her life back. She found work quickly. Years of managing social events for Colin's business associates had given her skills she'd never thought to monetize: organizing, coordinating, solving problems gracefully under pressure. A small consulting firm hired her to help struggling local businesses improve their operations and community outreach. Her first client was a family-owned bookstore hemorrhaging money to online retailers. Reese spent weeks analyzing their inventory, talking to customers, understanding what made independent bookstores survive when so many failed. She suggested hosting community events, partnering with local schools, creating a loyalty program that felt personal rather than transactional. Within 3 months, the bookstore was breaking even. Within 6, it was profitable. "You saved us," the owner said, tears in her eyes as she handed Reese a check. "We were going to close next month. You gave us a future." Reese had felt something ignite in her chest, purpose that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or managing someone else's ambitions. This was hers. She took on more clients: a struggling cafe, a community center, a small construction company run by a woman trying to compete in a male-dominated field. Each business had different problems, but the same core need: someone who would listen carefully, think creatively, and help them find their own strength. Word spread. Her schedule filled. She worked harder than she ever had during her marriage, but the exhaustion felt earned rather than inflicted. It was at a community fundraiser for HIV awareness that she met Julian Brooks. The event was held in a converted warehouse decorated with art created by people living with HIV. Reese had volunteered to help organize it, drawn by the topic that had upended her life. She wanted to understand this virus better, to take back power by learning what had been used against her. Julian was setting up chairs when she arrived, moving with easy efficiency, despite the thick scar tissue visible on his forearms, burn marks, she'd later learn, from a childhood accident. He had warm brown eyes and laugh lines that suggested he smiled often. "You must be Reese," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Julian. Thanks for helping out today." "Of course. What do you need me to do?" He handed her a stack of programs. "These go on every chair. Fair warning, It's emotional stuff. We've got speakers sharing their experiences, including some pretty raw stories about diagnosis and discrimination. They worked side by side for an hour, and Reese found herself relaxing around this stranger in ways she hadn't with anyone since leaving Colin. Julian talked easily, sharing stories about the community centre where he worked as a social worker, about the programs they ran for people living with HIV. Most of my clients are managing the virus fine, he explained. Modern treatment is incredibly effective, but the stigma, that's what really destroys lives. People lose jobs, relationships, housing. Fear is often more dangerous than the actual disease. How did you get into this work? Reese asked. Julian paused, considering how much to share. Then, I'm positive. Have been for over a decade. I got sick before better treatments existed, nearly died, then recovered and decided to dedicate my life to making sure other people didn't have to face it alone. He said it so matter-of-factly, without shame or dramatics, just a truth he'd integrated into his identity. I'm sorry, Reese said, then immediately regretted it. Sorry? I don't mean sorry like pity, I mean, I know what you mean. Julian smiled, and thank you. But I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm healthy, I have work I love, and I get to help people every day. Not a bad life. The fundraiser was powerful. Speaker after speaker shared stories of diagnosis, discrimination, resilience. A grandmother who'd been infected through a blood transfusion, a college student who'd contracted HIV from his first sexual partner. A former executive who'd lost everything when his status was disclosed without consent, then rebuilt his life from scratch. Each story resonated with different parts of Reese's experience: the betrayal, the fear, the discovery that life continues even after catastrophe. During the break, Julian found her standing near the art displays, studying a painting of hands reaching toward light. Intense, right? He said. Yeah. Reese wiped her eyes. I had no idea. About any of this, the science, the discrimination, how manageable it is now with treatment. I thought I understood, but I didn't really. Most people don't. That's why we do these events. He studied her face. Can I ask why you volunteered? You seem personally invested somehow. So Reese told him about Colin's accusation, her negative test, the discovery of the affair, the divorce. She didn't usually share her story. It felt too raw, too private. But something about Julian's openness invited honesty. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful. Your ex-husband tried to weaponize HIV against you, Julian said when she finished, used it to blame you for his own choices. That's unfortunately common, people treating the virus like a moral judgment instead of a medical condition. The worst part was feeling powerless, Reese admitted. Like my health, my reputation, my entire life depended on proving something I knew was true, but couldn't demonstrate until the test came back. That's what we're fighting against, the idea that HIV is something shameful that needs to be proven or disproven, rather than a medical condition that needs to be treated with compassion and science. They talked until the event ended, then helped clean up while continuing their conversation. Julian mentioned the need for better resources. Job training for people who faced employment discrimination because of their status, housing assistance, mental health support. What we really need is a comprehensive program, he said, stacking chairs. Something that addresses the whole person, not just the virus, but funding is always a challenge. An idea sparked in Reese's mind. What if we created something? A program that combined your knowledge of what the community needs with business skills to make it sustainable. Julian looked at her with interest. You'd want to do that? I help struggling businesses find their footing. Why not help people do the same thing? The more she thought about it, the more right it felt. You understand what people living with HIV actually need. I understand how to build programs that last. We could be a good team. When you say team, Julian's smile was cautious but hopeful. I mean, let's build something together. a real initiative that makes a difference. They exchanged contact information, made plans to meet the following week to discuss details. As Reese drove home that night, she felt something unfamiliar, excitement about the future that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colin. "I heard you were at an AIDS event. Are you trying to humiliate me publicly by associating our name with this?" Reese deleted the message without responding. Colin's humiliation was his own creation, his burden to carry. She had something better to focus on now, building something that mattered with someone who understood that strength comes from helping others rather than diminishing them. The apartment felt less empty when she walked in. She made tea, opened her laptop, and started drafting ideas for what would eventually become the Phoenix Initiative, a program that would help hundreds of people rebuild their lives from the ashes of discrimination and fear. She didn't know it yet, but she was also rebuilding herself, becoming someone stronger and more purposeful than the woman who'd believed her worth was measured by her husband's success. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Reese was excited to see what came next. Chapter 6. The Empire of Compassion. 2 years after walking away from a billionaire's mansion, Reese stood in a converted industrial space, watching Julian cut a ribbon stretched across the entrance to something worth more than all of Colin's wealth. Hope made tangible. The Phoenix Initiative's main building hummed with purposeful activity. Computer stations filled one corner where people learned coding and digital design. A small commercial kitchen occupied another space, teaching culinary skills to aspiring entrepreneurs. Meeting rooms hosted support groups, counseling sessions, legal consultations. The walls displayed artwork created by program participants, bright and defiant declarations that diagnosis didn't define destiny. "This is incredible," the mayor said, touring the facility with genuine enthusiasm. "You've created something truly special here." Reese exchanged a glance with Julian across the room. They'd worked relentlessly to make this happen, writing grants, courting donors, negotiating partnerships with medical providers and educational institutions. They'd argued over budgets, compromised on priorities, pushed each other to think bigger than either would have alone. Somewhere during those long nights of planning and dreaming, their partnership had shifted into something more personal. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe when Julian had brought her soup when she was sick with flu, or when she'd held his hand during a difficult medical appointment, or perhaps during the 1,000 small moments of understanding that accumulated into intimacy, they'd started dating cautiously. Julian had been transparent about his status from the beginning, making sure Reese understood what a relationship with him would mean. She'd educated herself thoroughly about transmission risks, treatment protocols, prevention strategies. They'd talked for weeks before becoming physical, establishing trust and boundaries. The relationship was nothing like her marriage. Julian never made promises he couldn't keep, never hid parts of himself to appear more attractive, never expected Reese to diminish herself to make him feel larger. They were partners in the truest sense, two whole people choosing to build something together rather than one person trying to complete themselves through another. "Reese, can you come here?" One of their program coordinators waved her over to where a young woman was filling out intake paperwork, tears streaming down her face. "I lost my job," the woman explained. "They found out about my status and suddenly I was being written up for things that were never problems before I got fired last week, and I don't know how I'll afford my medication." Reese sat down beside her. "That's illegal discrimination, and we have lawyers who can help you fight it. But first, let's make sure you get your medication. We have an emergency fund for exactly this situation." The woman's relief was visceral. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" "Because everyone deserves support," Reese said simply. "And because I've learned that the strongest thing you can build is a community that refuses to let people face their struggles alone." She thought about Colin sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a distant curiosity about what he was doing, whether he'd learned anything from destroying their marriage. Through mutual acquaintances, she'd heard fragments. His business had collapsed after several major partners dissolved their contracts, not because of his diagnosis, but because word spread about how he'd treated Reese and Lucille. Apparently, investors didn't want to associate with someone who blamed others for his own failures. His mansion had been sold to cover debts. He'd moved to a smaller place across town. The social circle they'd once inhabited had closed ranks against him. Turns out that wealthy people valued loyalty and discretion, and Colin had demonstrated neither. Reese felt no satisfaction in his downfall. She'd built something too meaningful to waste energy on vindication, but she couldn't deny a sense of balance restored. Consequences had finally caught up with the man who'd tried to escape them. The Phoenix Initiative's grand opening celebration stretched late into the evening. Donors mingled with program participants. Former clients shared success stories. Volunteers laughed over wine and cheese. Julian found Reese standing near the windows, looking out at the city lights. "You okay?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Better than okay, I'm proud. We did this." "You did most of it. I just provided the initial vision." "We're a team," Reese corrected. "Neither of us could have built this alone." Julian turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I love you. I know we agreed to take things slow, but I need you to know, you've changed my life in ways I can't even articulate." Reese felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I love you too. You showed me what real partnership looks like. Mutual respect, honest communication, supporting each other's growth instead of competing for space." They kissed softly, surrounded by the sound of celebration and possibility. The party was winding down when someone unexpected appeared in the doorway. Colin Finch, looking diminished somehow, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose on a thinner frame. Reese felt Julian tense beside her. "Want me to ask him to leave?" "No, let's see what he wants." They approached Colin together, a united front. His eyes moved between them, registering their linked hands, the obvious intimacy of their body language. "Reese," Colin said quietly. "Julian, I'm sorry to interrupt. I saw the article about the initiative in the paper. It's impressive what you've built." "What are you doing here, Colin?" Reese kept her voice neutral. "I wanted to congratulate you, and to ask—" He paused, seeming genuinely uncertain for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "I'm struggling with everything. I lost my business, most of my money, my reputation. I've been going to therapy, working with an HIV specialist, trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did to you." "That's good," Reese said. "Growth is important. The thing is, I need help, not money. I know I have no right to ask for that. But I heard the initiative offers job training, counseling, resources for people trying to rebuild. I was wondering if—" He trailed off, the request implicit. Reese looked at Julian, who shrugged slightly. "Your call." "We help anyone who needs it," Reese said slowly. "If you're genuinely committed to changing your life, to doing the work, then yes, you can apply to our program like anyone else. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'd have to participate fully, attend all required sessions, be honest with counselors and yourself." "I understand. Thank you." Colin's relief was palpable. "I know I don't deserve your kindness after what I did." "This isn't about deserving," Reese interrupted. "It's about believing people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Can you do that?" "I'm trying to. Every day, I'm trying to become someone better than I was." They gave him intake paperwork, scheduled an assessment appointment. After he left, Julian pulled Reese close. "That was generous of you," he said, letting him into the program. "It was the right thing to do. We don't turn away people who genuinely need help, even if they've hurt us personally. That's the whole point of what we've built." "Still." Not everyone could extend that grace. Reese thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, crushed, furious, certain her life was over. That version of herself would have sent Colin away. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd built a life defined by compassion rather than bitterness, by creating rather than destroying. "I could afford to be generous," she said, "because I have everything that matters. Work I'm proud of, a partner I love, a community I belong to. His presence doesn't threaten any of that." They finished cleaning up, locked the building, drove home to the apartment they now shared. It was modest compared to what Reese had left behind, but it felt like theirs. Walls covered with photographs from their travels, shelves crowded with books they'd read together, a kitchen table where they planned their future over morning coffee. As Reese fell asleep that night, Julian's breathing steady beside her, she reflected on how radically her life had transformed. Colin's betrayal had destroyed her marriage, but inadvertently freed her to become someone she'd never imagined, a leader, an advocate, a builder of systems that helped people thrive. The Phoenix Initiative would continue growing. They had plans to expand to other cities, develop new programs, reach more people who needed support. The work would be challenging, exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking, but it would be meaningful. And Reese had learned that meaningful was worth more than comfortable, that purpose mattered more than luxury, that building something with someone you respected was infinitely more valuable than being married to someone you couldn't trust. Colin had taken 8 years of her life with his lies. She'd spent the last 2 years building something so much better from the ruins. That felt like justice. Not the vindictive kind Colin had earned, but the restorative kind that healed while it grew. Chapter 7. The Beggar at the Gate. The Colin Finch, who sat across from Reese in the Phoenix Initiative's intake office, looked carved from different material than the man who'd accused her of infidelity 3 years ago. This version had been hollowed out and refilled with something heavier, darker, humbler. "Tell me why you're here," Reese said, her tone professional rather than warm. She'd agreed to conduct his initial assessment herself, partly from curiosity, partly from wanting to see with her own eyes whether his transformation was genuine. Colin's hands trembled slightly as he filled out paperwork. "I've lost almost everything. My business dissolved after partners withdrew their investments. Turns out people don't want to work with someone known for blaming others when things go wrong. My house is gone, sold to pay debts. Friends stopped calling, family relationships are strained." "How are you managing your health?" "I have good doctors now. Medication is working. My viral load has been undetectable for over a year." He paused, "But I struggled at first. I denied the diagnosis, stopped taking pills consistently, made everything worse through my own stubbornness." Reese made notes, keeping her expression neutral. "What changed?" "I hit bottom, really hit it. I was living in a terrible apartment, barely eating, drowning in self-pity. Then I got a call from my father, who I hadn't spoken to in months. He told me he was ashamed of how I'd treated you, that he didn't recognize the person I'd become. Hearing that from him, someone I'd spent my whole life trying to impress, broke something open. So you went to therapy?" "Eventually. First I spent a few more months being angry at everyone else. But yeah, I finally found a good therapist. Been seeing her consistently for over a year now. She's helped me understand patterns I'd been repeating my whole life. Blaming others, avoiding accountability, treating people as tools rather than humans." Reese watched him carefully, looking for signs of performance. Colin had always been skilled at telling people what they wanted to hear. But something about his body language felt different. Less polished, more uncertain. "What do you want from the Phoenix Initiative?" "Job training. I need to rebuild a career, but I don't know how anymore. My entire identity was wrapped up in being wealthy, successful, powerful. Without that, I don't know who I am. I thought your program might help me figure it out." "We offer several training tracks. What interests you?" Colin laughed bitterly. "I have no idea. That's part of the problem. I spent so many years doing what looked impressive rather than what felt meaningful. Now I need to learn what actual contribution looks like. They discussed options, technology training, counseling certification, community organizing. Colin admitted he'd been teaching himself basic coding, working through online tutorials late at night when insomnia struck. "I like it," he said, sounding surprised. "The logic of it, the problem solving. It's honest. Either code works or it doesn't. No talking your way around bad results." Reese found herself believing him despite her skepticism. The old Colin would have chosen whatever path seemed most prestigious. This Colin seemed genuinely interested in work that would challenge him. "If we accept you into the program, you'll be expected to participate fully," Reese said. "That includes support groups, counseling sessions, community service. You'll work alongside other people who are rebuilding their lives, many of whom have faced discrimination because of their HIV status. Can you handle that?" "I think I need it," Colin admitted. "Being around people who've been through real struggles, who didn't have wealth to cushion their falls, maybe it'll teach me perspective I should have learned years ago." "You'd also be expected to share your story eventually, to be honest about your mistakes, how you hurt people, what you're learning. That's part of how we build community here, through authentic vulnerability." Colin's face tightened. "That's harder. Being publicly accountable for everything I did wrong." "Then maybe you're not ready." "No, I mean, yes, I can do it. It's just terrifying, but necessary. I understand that." They finished the intake process. Reese scheduled him for orientation, assigned him a counselor, added him to the coding training roster. As Colin stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Reese, I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it anyway. What I did to you was unforgivable. I was cruel, cowardly, and destructive. You deserved so much better. I'm glad you found it with Julian. He's a good man, better than I ever was." "Yes, he is," Reese agreed simply. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness or friendship. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You were always the strong one in our marriage. I was just too insecure to recognize it." After he left, Julian appeared in the doorway. "How'd it go?" "I think he might actually be serious about changing. Time will tell." Over the following months, Colin proved consistent. He showed up for every class, every counseling session, every community meeting. He learned coding with surprising aptitude, helping other participants debug their projects, explaining complex concepts with patience Reese had never seen him demonstrate before. In support groups, he shared his story with painful honesty. The affair, the diagnosis, the way he'd blamed Reese rather than face his own failures. His willingness to be vulnerable seemed to help others open up about their own struggles with shame and accountability. "I spent years thinking my worth came from money and status," Colin told the group during one session. Reese observed, "I treated people like chess pieces, moving them around to benefit myself. It took losing everything to realize that's not strength. It's weakness, masquerading as power." Reese watched him interact with other program participants, helping a struggling single mother understand job application software, listening patiently while a young man vented about employment discrimination, sharing resources he'd discovered during his own job search. These actions felt genuine rather than performative. But it was his interaction with Lucille that truly convinced Reese something had fundamentally shifted. Lucille had started volunteering at the Phoenix Initiative, working with newly diagnosed individuals. She and Colin had carefully avoided each other for weeks, until one afternoon when they ended up in the same volunteer training. Reese watched them navigate an awkward conversation, both clearly uncomfortable. But when Lucille talked about her work helping people cope with their diagnosis, Colin listened with genuine interest. He asked thoughtful questions, acknowledged how his abandonment had made her situation harder. "I'm sorry," he told Lucille during a break, when he didn't know Reese could hear, "for lying to you, for disappearing when you needed support, for thinking only about myself. You deserved honesty from the beginning." "Thank you for saying that," Lucille responded quietly. It helps. They didn't become friends. Too much damage had been done. But they found a way to exist in the same space without animosity, which felt like progress. Colin continued working with the initiative, eventually landing a junior developer position with a tech startup that specifically hired people facing employment barriers. His salary was a fraction of what he'd once earned, but he seemed genuinely proud of the work. "I'm contributing something real," he told Reese during a chance encounter in the initiative's kitchen. "Not just moving money around or making deals that benefit myself. I'm building tools that actually help people. It feels good." Reese studied him. This changed man who'd once destroyed their marriage. "I'm glad you found your way here, to this version of yourself. I wouldn't have without you leaving. If you'd stayed, if you'd enabled my worst qualities by absorbing my cruelty, I'd still be that person. Your refusal to tolerate my behavior forced me to confront it. I didn't leave to teach you a lesson, Colin. I left to save myself. I know that's what made it effective. You chose yourself over me, which is what I should have done for you all along, chosen your well-being over my ego." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd once been married now separated by experiences that had transformed them both. "Are you happy?" Colin asked. "Very. Getting there. I'm learning that happiness doesn't come from having power over others. It comes from being someone I can respect when I look in the mirror." Reese nodded, understanding the journey he was describing. She'd taken a similar one, learning to define herself by her values rather than her relationships. As Colin returned to his computer station and Reese headed to a meeting with potential donors, she felt grateful for the way life had unfolded. Colin's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed her to build something meaningful, and his transformation, however painful the process, suggested that people could change if they were willing to face themselves honestly. That was the core belief underlying everything the Phoenix Initiative did, that with proper support and genuine commitment, people could rebuild themselves into better versions of who they'd been. Not everyone made it. Some people got stuck in blame and bitterness, unable to move past their pain. But some, like Colin, did the hard work of becoming different. Reese couldn't forgive him. The wounds were too deep for that, but she could acknowledge his growth and be glad he was finding his way toward becoming someone worthy of the second chance life had given him. That felt like enough. Chapter 8. The Defense. Reese watched in astonishment as Lucille Brennan stepped forward at the Phoenix Initiative Gala, her voice steady as she addressed 300 donors about the man who had once abandoned her at her most vulnerable moment. The evening had been proceeding smoothly. Testimonials from program graduates, presentations about expansion plans, live music performed by talented participants. Then Gerald Whitmore, a major donor, considering a substantial contribution, had raised his hand during the Q&A session with a question that threatened to derail everything. "I notice you accept people into your program regardless of how they contracted HIV, Whitmore said, his tone suggesting disapproval. "Including wealthy individuals who brought problems on themselves through infidelity. I'm specifically referring to Colin Finch, whose story I'm familiar with. Why should charitable dollars support someone like that instead of innocent victims?" The room had gone silent. Reese saw Colin sitting near the back, his face draining of color. She'd stepped forward to respond, to defend their inclusive admission policy, but Lucille had moved faster. "May I address that?" Lucille asked, walking to the microphone with surprising confidence for someone who usually avoided public speaking. Reese nodded, curious what Lucille would say. "My name is Lucille Brennan. I'm the woman who unknowingly transmitted HIV to Colin Finch during an affair we had several years ago. I'm also HIV positive and a volunteer with the Phoenix Initiative." The room's attention sharpened. Whitmore looked uncomfortable, perhaps regretting his question. "You called Colin someone who brought problems on himself," Lucille continued. "And yes, he made terrible choices. He cheated on his wife, lied to both of us, handled his diagnosis with cowardice. Those are facts. But let me tell you what else is fact. He's spent 3 years rebuilding himself into someone unrecognizable from the man I knew. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I met Colin, I was the innocent victim in your framework. Someone who contracted HIV through no fault of my own from a partner who lied about his status. Colin was the guilty one, the cheater, the liar, the man who deserved consequences. But that binary thinking is exactly what the Phoenix Initiative exists to challenge. Lucille's voice grew stronger. Colin's not here because Reese feels sorry for him or because he's getting special treatment. He's here because he needed help and was willing to do the hard work of change. He shows up to every session, helps other participants, shares his story honestly, even when it's humiliating. He's learned coding skills and landed a real job. He volunteers with newly diagnosed individuals, using his mistakes to help them avoid similar ones. That doesn't excuse his behavior, Whitmore interjected. You're right, it doesn't. Nothing excuses what he did. But the question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness. That's between him and the people he hurt. The question is whether we believe people can change, and whether our support should be conditional on them being perfect victims versus flawed humans. Lucille looked directly at Whitmore. If we only help people who've done nothing wrong, we ignore the reality that most people facing discrimination have complicated stories. The young man who contracted HIV because he didn't know about PrEP, does he deserve help? What about the woman who got infected because she trusted the wrong partner? Or the person who skipped doses of medication because of mental health struggles and became infectious again? She gestured around the room. Everyone here has made mistakes. The difference is that most of our mistakes don't come with lifelong medical consequences. Collins did. But that doesn't mean he should be abandoned to suffer without support. The Phoenix Initiative taught me something crucial, Lucille said. We're not here to judge who deserves help. We're here to offer it to anyone willing to engage honestly with their circumstances and work toward growth. That includes former wealthy executives who lost everything, just like it includes people who never had anything to lose. She smiled softly. Colin isn't the villain in my story anymore. Ignorance is. Stigma is. The fear that prevents people from getting tested, seeking treatment, being honest with partners. Those are the real enemies. Colin was just another casualty of those forces, and he's doing the brave work of recovery. Lucille returned to her seat, and the room erupted in applause. Whitmore looked chastened, nodding slowly. When the Q&A resumed, his questions were more thoughtful, less judgmental. After the gala ended, Reese found Lucille and Colin talking quietly near the bar. She approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude. That was brave, Reese told Lucille. Thank you for speaking up. I needed to say it, not just for Colin, but for myself. Lucille glanced at him. For a long time, I saw him as the person who ruined my life. But staying in that narrative kept me stuck in victim mode. Watching him actually change helped me see that we were both just people who made mistakes and got hurt by forces bigger than either of us. Colin's eyes were red. I don't deserve your defense after what I did to you. That's not the point, Lucille said gently. It's not about deserving. It's about recognizing that we're all trying to find our way through difficult circumstances. I can acknowledge you hurt me, while also acknowledging you're genuinely different now. They stood together awkwardly, 3 people connected by painful history, learning to exist in each other's presence without animosity. I should go, Colin said, but thank you both for everything. After he left, Reese and Lucille remained standing near the bar, watching donors mingle and celebrate. Do you forgive him? Reese asked quietly. I don't think about it in those terms anymore, Lucille said. Forgiveness feels like something I'd give to relieve his guilt. Instead, I've just released my attachment to anger. He's not taking up space in my head anymore. That feels better than forgiveness. Reese understood exactly what she meant. She'd spent months in therapy, working through similar feelings about Colin, not trying to forgive him, but learning to stop letting his betrayal define her story. "How are you doing?" Reese asked. "Really doing?" "Better than I've been in years. The volunteer work here has been healing, helping newly diagnosed people navigate their fear. It reminds me how far I've come, how much I've learned." "And I met someone," Lucille added shyly. "Another volunteer. He's positive too, incredibly kind, doesn't treat me like I'm damaged. I'm happy for you." "I never thanked you properly," Lucille said, "for not hating me, for letting me volunteer here, even though my presence must be uncomfortable given our history. You could have made this space unwelcoming. Instead, you made it healing." "We're all healing," Reese said simply. "That's the point." Julian appeared with champagne, handing glasses to both women. "That speech was phenomenal, Lucille. Half the donors came up afterward, asking how to increase their contributions." "Really?" Lucille looked surprised. "I was terrified I'd made things worse." "You made things better. You reminded people what we're actually about. Compassion without condition, support without judgment, belief in genuine transformation." They toasted to the evening's success, to the program's growth, to the messy, complicated work of helping people rebuild their lives. Later, driving home with Julian, Reese reflected on how radically her life had transformed. 3 years ago, she'd been married to Colin, completely unaware of his betrayal. Now she was in love with Julian, running a successful initiative, working alongside Lucille, the woman who'd unknowingly been part of her marriage's destruction. Life was strange in its symmetries, in the way pain could eventually transform into purpose if you were willing to do the work. "You're quiet," Julian observed, "just thinking about how everything connects. Colin's betrayal led me here, to this work, to you. Lucille's infection led to Colin's diagnosis, which revealed his lies, which freed me to leave. None of it was good, but all of it led somewhere meaningful." "That's the thing about growth," Julian said. "It usually comes from something breaking first. The question is what you build from the pieces." Reese looked at him, this man who'd shown her what real partnership looked like, who'd taught her that love could be steady and honest and challenging and safe all at once. "I'm glad you were one of the pieces I found," she said. He reached over and took her hand. "Same here. You're the best thing that ever came from my diagnosis, the proof that sometimes terrible circumstances lead to extraordinary people walking into your life." They drove through the city streets, past the initiative's building, where lights still glowed in windows, past the places where they'd built their shared life, toward the home that held their future. Behind them, Colin was probably heading to his small apartment, processing the evening's events, continuing his slow transformation. Lucille was likely texting her new partner, building a relationship on honesty rather than deception. Everyone was moving forward, learning to carry their pasts without being crushed by them. And Reese, driving through the night with Julian's hand in hers, felt grateful for the journey, the painful parts and the beautiful ones, the destruction and the rebuilding, all of it leading to this moment of hard-won peace. Chapter 9. The Letter and the Choice. Julian found Reese on their apartment balcony at midnight, Colin's letter trembling in her hands as city lights blurred through tears she couldn't quite explain. "Hey," Julian said softly, settling into the chair beside her. "You've been out here for an hour. Everything okay?" Reese handed him the letter without speaking. She'd opened it expecting more manipulation, another attempt to worm his way back into her life. Instead, she'd found something that felt like genuine closure. Julian read silently, while Reese watched cars move through streets below, their headlights cutting temporary paths through darkness. "This is beautiful," Julian said finally, raw and honest in ways I didn't think Colin was capable of. The letter had arrived that afternoon, forwarded through the initiative, with a note from Colin explaining that he was moving across the country for a job opportunity and wanted to say a proper goodbye inside. He'd written several pages about his transformation, about the lessons he'd learned through losing everything, about gratitude for the way Reese's departure had forced him to confront himself. "He thanked me," Reese said, "for leaving him. He called it the greatest act of love I could have shown, refusing to enable his destruction." He's right about that. He wrote about watching us build the initiative, how it inspired him to create something meaningful too. He started a consulting firm that helps struggling companies restructure, and he's donating most of his income to HIV organizations. Julian set the letter down. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know. Confused, relieved, sad maybe for the years we wasted before things had to explode." Reese wiped her eyes. He wrote that he's in a relationship with someone he met through a support group, someone who knows his full history and loves him anyway. He's healthy. His viral load has been undetectable for nearly 2 years. That's good. Recovery and health, those are things to celebrate. He apologized again, but differently this time, not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging the harm he caused and taking responsibility for it. He said the person who accused me of infidelity 3 years ago was someone he barely recognizes now, that becoming someone he respects required completely dismantling who he used to be. Reese pulled her knees to her chest, looking small in the oversized chair. The letter ends with him saying that my refusal to forgive him was actually more healing than forgiveness would have been, that it forced him to forgive himself instead, which was harder but more transformative. Julian reached over and took her hand. "Why are you crying?" "Because it's over. Really over. For 3 years, part of me has been waiting for him to reveal that his transformation was fake, that he was manipulating everyone to rebuild his reputation. But this letter feels like actual closure. He's moved on, built a life, become someone different. And I'm realizing I've been carrying anger I didn't know was still there, waiting for permission to let it go." "You don't need his transformation to let go of your anger," Julian said gently. "Your healing isn't dependent on his growth. I know that intellectually, but emotionally it helps. Knowing he genuinely changed, that my leaving actually catalyzed something positive rather than just causing mutual destruction. It matters somehow." They sat in silence for a while, watching the city breathe below them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" Julian asked. "If you'd tried to make the marriage work?" "Sometimes, but I think I know the answer. If I'd stayed, I would have enabled his worst qualities while destroying myself in the process. He needed to hit bottom to change, and I needed to leave to discover who I was outside of being his wife." "No regrets?" "About leaving? None about the years I spent with him believing lies. That's harder. I regret the time lost, the self-respect I compromised, the ways I made myself smaller to accommodate his ego. But those experiences also led me here, to this work, to you. So maybe I don't regret them after all." Julian read through the letter again, then looked at Reese thoughtfully. "He's become the kind of person who deserved you in the first place, which means he finally understands why he lost you." The observation landed with unexpected weight. Reese felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been holding for years without recognizing it. "That's exactly it," she said. "He gets it now. He understands what he threw away and why he didn't deserve to keep it. That's what I needed. Not his apology, not his transformation, but his genuine comprehension of what he destroyed." "So what are you going to do?" "Nothing. Let him live his life while I live mine. Maybe send a brief response acknowledging the letter, wishing him well. But mostly just close this chapter completely and focus on what matters, the work we're doing, the life we're building, the future we're creating." Julian pulled her close, and Reese leaned into him, feeling safe and valued in ways she'd never experienced with Colin. "I'm grateful for him," she said quietly, "for what happened, as awful as it was. Because it brought me here to you, to this version of myself that I actually respect. I wouldn't be this person if that marriage hadn't ended. I'm grateful too, But mostly I'm grateful for who you are, not because of what he did, but because of how you chose to respond to it. You could have become bitter, closed off, unwilling to trust again. Instead, you built something beautiful from the wreckage. They stayed on the balcony until the city quieted, until the traffic thinned to occasional cars and the lights in distant buildings began switching off. They talked about their upcoming wedding, a small ceremony next month with close friends and program participants, nothing fancy or expensive, just honest celebration of commitment between equals. They discussed the initiative's latest expansion plans, the satellite office opening across the state, the new programs they wanted to develop. They dreamed about the future the way partners do, not one person's vision imposed on the other, but collaborative imagining of what they might create together. When they finally went inside, Reese tucked Colin's letter into a drawer where she kept important documents. Not to obsess over, not to review repeatedly, but to preserve as evidence of how far everyone involved had traveled from that terrible moment when he'd accused her in their kitchen. "I'm going to respond to him tomorrow," she told Julian as they got ready for bed. "Just a short note saying I received the letter. I'm glad he's found his way to a better life, and I wish him continued health and happiness." "That's generous of you." "It's honest, I do wish him well. His suffering wouldn't make me happier, and his growth doesn't diminish mine. We're just two people who hurt each other badly and managed to survive it by going in opposite directions." Reese fell asleep that night, feeling lighter than she had in years. Colin's letter had given her something she hadn't known she needed. Confirmation that leaving him was the right choice, not just for her, but for him too, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction, even if they beg you to stay. In the morning, she drafted her response. "Colin, thank you for your letter. I'm glad you've found health, purpose, and love. Your transformation speaks to the resilience you've discovered in yourself. Our marriage ended badly, and we both carry scars from those years. But I harbor no ill will toward the person you've become. You're right that my leaving forced us both to confront ourselves honestly, and we're both better for having done that work separately. I wish you continued success in your recovery and your life. May you keep building things worth being proud of. Reese." She sent it without overthinking, then turned her attention to the day ahead, meetings with potential donors, a site visit to evaluate space for the new office, lunch with Lucille to discuss volunteer training improvements. Her life was full of purpose and connection, built on foundations of honesty rather than performance. She'd survived betrayal and discovered strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd built an organization that helped hundreds of people, fallen in love with someone who treated her with respect, and learned that she didn't need someone else's validation to know her worth. Colin's letter was the final punctuation mark on a chapter that had closed years ago. Now, Reese could move forward without any lingering threads pulling her backward, free to fully inhabit the life she'd created from the ashes of her marriage. And that freedom felt like the truest happy ending she could have asked for. Chapter 10. The Gift of Redemption. 5 years after the worst night of her life, Reese stood before 500 people gathered at the Phoenix Initiative's anniversary celebration, preparing to tell a truth that still sometimes took her breath away. Betrayal had been her liberation. The convention center hummed with conversations, laughter, the clinking of glasses raised in triumph and possibility. Every seat was occupied by someone whose life had intersected with the organization she and Julian had built from shared purpose and stubborn hope, former clients who now ran their own businesses, volunteers who'd discovered calling in service, medical professionals who'd learned to treat patients with radical dignity. Julian stood beside her at the podium, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a gesture of support rather than possession. They'd married 2 years ago in a ceremony that felt nothing like the lavish performance of Reese's first wedding. This one had been honest, intimate, witnessed by people who knew both their struggles and their commitment to facing life as partners rather than adversaries. "Thank you all for being here," Reese began, her voice steady through the microphone. 5 years ago, this organization didn't exist. 5 years ago, I was in the wreckage of a marriage that had imploded spectacularly, holding medical test results that proved my innocence of something I'd been accused of, and trying to figure out who I was outside of being someone's wife. She paused, letting the memory wash through her without drowning in it. I thought I'd attend a volunteer event, help out for a day, maybe distract myself from the pain. Instead, I met Julian, and he taught me something revolutionary, that HIV wasn't a death sentence, wasn't a mark of shame, wasn't the end of possibility. It was a medical condition requiring treatment and compassion, nothing more and nothing less. Julian squeezed her shoulder gently. Together, we asked ourselves what kind of support people really needed. Not just medical care, though that's crucial, but job training for people facing employment discrimination, mental health services for those drowning in stigma, legal advocacy for individuals whose rights were being violated, housing assistance, community dignity. Reese gestured to the room filled with evidence of what they'd built. The Phoenix Initiative now operates in 12 cities. We've served thousands of people living with HIV, helping them find employment, housing, healthcare, and most importantly, community that refuses to let anyone face their struggles alone. Her voice grew stronger. But we don't just help people with HIV. We help anyone facing discrimination because of health status, employment barriers because of prejudice, housing insecurity because society decided they don't matter. We've built a model that treats people as humans first, challenges second. She looked at the diverse crowd, young and old, every ethnicity and background, people whose only common thread was having been failed by systems that should have supported them. "I need to talk about something uncomfortable," Reese said. "The Phoenix Initiative exists because my ex-husband cheated on me, contracted HIV through that infidelity, then accused me of giving him the virus rather than face his own choices. That betrayal was devastating, but it also freed me to discover work that matters, love that's genuine, and a version of myself I'm proud to be." She noticed Colin sitting in the back row, accompanied by a woman whose hand he held carefully. His partner of 3 years, someone who'd met him at his lowest point and chosen to build with him anyway. "My ex-husband is here tonight," Reese continued, surprising the room. "Not because I've forgiven him. That's not required for healing. But because he's done the hardest work anyone can do. He dismantled who he was and rebuilt himself into someone better. That transformation doesn't erase the harm he caused. But it does prove something important. People can change if they're willing to face themselves honestly and do the uncomfortable work of growth." She shifted to the educational portion of her speech, the part that mattered most. "I want to share some crucial facts about HIV because stigma thrives on ignorance and dies with education. First, and most important, U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. People living with HIV who take their medication consistently and maintain an undetectable viral load cannot sexually transmit the virus. This is scientifically proven, and it changes everything." Reese watched understanding spread through the audience. "This means that with proper treatment, people with HIV can have healthy relationships without fear of transmission. They can have children without passing the virus. They can live completely normal lifespans. HIV is no longer the death sentence it was decades ago. It's a manageable chronic condition, like diabetes or high blood pressure." She clicked to display statistics on the screen behind her. PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, is medication that prevents HIV acquisition in people at risk. One pill daily reduces transmission risk by more than 99%, yet many people who would benefit from PrEP don't know it exists or can't access it because of cost or stigma. That's something we work to change. Modern antiretroviral therapy allows people with HIV to live full, healthy lives, but treatment only works if people know their status, which requires testing. Regular testing for anyone who's sexually active, especially those in non-monogamous relationships or with partners whose status is unknown, is crucial for prevention and early treatment. Reese's voice softened. Here's what I wish someone had told me when my marriage imploded. The greatest threat isn't the virus itself, it's the stigma that prevents testing, treatment, and honest communication. Fear of judgment keeps people from getting tested until they're already sick. Shame prevents disclosure to partners, creating transmission risks. Discrimination pushes people away from healthcare and support systems. My ex-husband knew he might be infected for months before he got tested. Why? Because he was terrified of the diagnosis, the stigma, the consequences. That fear endangered my health and his own. If we lived in a society that treated HIV like any other medical condition, requiring management but not defining human worth, he might have gotten tested immediately, started treatment sooner, and protected both of us. She looked directly at the audience now, making eye contact with individuals scattered throughout the room. So here's what I'm asking from everyone here tonight. Become educated about HIV transmission and prevention. Talk openly with your partners about testing and status. If you're diagnosed, know that treatment allows for a completely normal life. If someone you love is diagnosed, respond with compassion rather than judgment, and most importantly, fight the stigma that does more damage than the virus ever could. Reese stepped back from the microphone briefly, gathering her thoughts for the conclusion. The Phoenix Initiative is named for a reason. We believe in rising from ashes, in transformation through fire, in the possibility of becoming something new and strong from what seemed like complete destruction. Every person in this room is evidence that life continues after catastrophe, that purpose can emerge from pain, that community can be built from shared struggle. I didn't ask for the betrayal that brought me here. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I'm grateful for what I built from those ashes. Not just this organization, but the person I've become. Someone who knows her worth isn't dependent on any relationship, someone who can extend compassion without enabling destruction, someone who believes in genuine transformation because I've lived it. She reached for Julian's hand. My husband, Julian, taught me something crucial. Love isn't about completing each other or losing yourself in someone else. It's about two whole people choosing to build something together while remaining entirely themselves. That's what we've created here. Not just a romantic partnership, but a professional collaboration based on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values. So, as we celebrate 5 years of the Phoenix Initiative, I want to thank everyone who's been part of this journey. The volunteers who show up week after week, the donors who believe in our mission, the medical professionals who treat our clients with dignity, the program participants who do the hard work of rebuilding their lives, and especially Julian for showing me what partnership looks like when both people are committed to growth instead of control. Reese's conclusion came from her core. The greatest revenge isn't punishment. It's building a life so meaningful that the betrayal becomes irrelevant. My ex-husband tried to destroy me with false accusations. Instead, he accidentally freed me to become someone I'm proud to be. That's not forgiveness, and it's not forgetting. It's simply moving forward with such purpose that the past loses its power to define the present. We can't prevent every betrayal, every diagnosis, every moment when life fractures unexpectedly, but we can choose how we respond. We can choose to build rather than destroy, to extend compassion rather than judgment, to believe in transformation while protecting ourselves from further harm. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing that people matter regardless of their health status, that support shouldn't be conditional on perfect behavior, that second chances can lead to genuine redemption. Together, we've built something revolutionary. A space where people can be entirely honest about their struggles while working toward better futures. The applause started softly, then swelled to fill the enormous room. Reese stepped back from the microphone, suddenly overwhelmed by the visible evidence of what they'd accomplished. 500 people whose lives had been touched by this work, standing and cheering for an organization built from the ruins of her marriage. As the celebration continued, Reese found herself in conversation after conversation with people whose stories reinforced why this work mattered. The young man who'd been fired after his status was disclosed, now running his own successful graphic design business. The woman who'd contemplated suicide after her diagnosis, now volunteering as a peer counselor, the couple navigating disclosure and relationship boundaries with newfound tools and support. Late in the evening, Colin approached cautiously. His partner stood slightly behind him, offering quiet support. "That was a powerful speech," Colin said. "Thank you for acknowledging my presence without making me the villain of the story." "You're not the villain anymore," Reese replied. "You're just someone who made terrible choices and did the work to become better. That's a different narrative. I appreciate that, more than you know." He gestured to his partner. "This is Amanda. She's been incredibly patient with me as I continue working through my past." Amanda smiled warmly. "He's told me everything, the good and the bad. I appreciate his honesty." Reese felt genuine happiness for them both. "I'm glad you found each other." "We're moving to the coast," Colin said. "I got a position leading a development team at a non-profit that builds technology for underserved communities. It feels like the right next step." "That's wonderful. Congratulations." They stood together briefly. Two people who'd once been married, now separated by growth that took them in entirely different directions. There was no lingering attraction, no residual bitterness, just acknowledgement that they'd both survived something difficult and emerged better for it. "I hope you know," Colin said quietly, "that watching what you built here changed my life. Seeing you transform pain into purpose showed me what real strength looks like. I'm trying to follow that example." "I hope you succeed," Reese said honestly. "Not for my sake, but for yours, and for everyone who interacts with the person you're becoming." After Colin and Amanda left, Julian found Reese standing by the windows overlooking the city. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his solid presence. "Hell of an evening," he murmured. "Hell of a life," Reese corrected. "Who would have thought betrayal and diagnosis would lead here, to this work, this community, us?" "The universe works in strange ways." "I don't believe in the universe having a plan, but I do believe we can choose to build something meaningful from whatever circumstances we're given. That's what we did. That's what everyone here tonight did." They stood watching the city lights together, two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to build rather than simply survive. The Phoenix Initiative would continue growing. They had plans to expand internationally, develop new programs, reach more people who needed support. The work would be challenging, exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking, but it would be meaningful. And meaning, Reese had learned, was worth more than comfort or revenge or validation from the person who'd wronged her. Colin had taken 8 years of her life with his lies. She'd spent 5 years building something so much better from those ruins, an organization that helped thousands, a relationship built on genuine partnership, a version of herself she actually respected. That wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even closure in the traditional sense. It was simply choosing to let the past be past, while focusing entirely on building a future worth living. As they left the celebration, walking through streets they'd traveled countless times before, Reese felt complete in ways she'd never experienced during her marriage. Not because Julian completed her, she'd learned that was a dangerous myth, but because she was entirely herself in his presence, valued and challenged and supported in equal measure. The greatest gift Colin's betrayal had given her wasn't the Phoenix Initiative or even meeting Julian. It was discovering that she didn't need anyone else to define her worth. She could create meaning through her actions, build community through her choices, and live with integrity regardless of how others treated her. That realization had been worth every moment of pain in the journey to reach it. And as they turned toward home, hands linked and future stretching before them like an open road, Reese knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice 5 years ago when she'd walked away from a mansion and a marriage to claim her own life. Sometimes the best revenge was simply becoming someone you were proud to be.